Have you ever wondered what happens to a town when every single person just disappears? When I first drove into the heart of the Nevada desert, I wasn't prepared for what I was about to find. Miles of endless sand, scorching heat, and then suddenly, there it was, an entire town frozen in time, as if everyone had vanished in the middle of their daily routines. Glasses still on tables. Doors left wide open. And the silence was deafening. Before we dive into these abandoned places that time forgot, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what I'm about to share with you will change the way you think about ghost towns forever. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming. The Nevada desert holds secrets that most people will never know exist. Scattered across this vast, unforgiving landscape are the skeletal remains of towns that once thrived with life, ambition, and dreams of striking it rich. But something happened to these places. Something that made entire populations pack up and leave, or in some cases, according to local reports, simply vanish without explanation. Today, we're going to explore the most mysterious abandoned towns in Nevada, places where the past refuses to stay buried, and where visitors claim to experience things that defy logical explanation. Let me take you back to the 1800s, when the promise of gold and silver drew thousands of fortune seekers into the brutal Nevada wilderness. These weren't just prospectors, these were families, entrepreneurs, saloon owners, blacksmiths, teachers, and preachers. They built entire communities in the middle of nowhere, complete with schools, churches, hotels, and even opera houses. For a brief moment in history, these towns exploded with activity. The sound of pickaxes hitting rock, the rumble of ore carts, the laughter from saloons, and the bustling streets filled with people chasing the American dream. But the desert has a way of reclaiming what doesn't belong to it. Our first stop is Rhyolite, one of the most photographed ghost towns in the entire United States. Located near Death Valley, Rhyolite experienced one of the most dramatic rises and falls in the history of the American West. In 1904, two prospectors discovered gold in the surrounding hills, and within months, what was empty desert became a booming metropolis. At its peak, Rhyolite had a population of nearly 10,000 people. Think about that for a moment, 10,000 people living in the middle of the desert. The town had electric lights, telephones, newspapers, a stock exchange, and even an ice cream parlor. The three-story bank building was constructed with marble and cost over $90,000, an astronomical sum at the time. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. By 1910, just 6 years after its founding, the mine started to fail. The gold wasn't as abundant as everyone had hoped. The financial panic of 1907 devastated the town's economy. People started leaving in waves. By 1916, the power was shut off. By 1920, Rhyolite was completely abandoned. What took years to build was reclaimed by the desert in less than a decade. Today, when you walk through Rhyolite, you can still see the ruins of that magnificent bank building, the crumbling walls of the jail, and the famous bottle house, a structure built entirely from beer and liquor bottles because wood was so scarce and expensive. But visitors to Rhyolite report something else, something that doesn't appear in any history book. According to numerous accounts, people have witnessed shadowy figures moving between the ruins at dusk. Some claim to hear the sound of piano music drifting from the empty shells of buildings where saloons once stood. Others report seeing a woman in Victorian-era clothing standing in the doorway of the old schoolhouse, only to vanish when approached. Local legends speak of a miner who died in a cave-in and whose apparition still searches the desert hills for the gold he never found. Now, I'm not here to tell you these stories are true, I'm simply sharing what people have reported experiencing in this desolate place. What makes Rhyolite particularly unsettling is the speed of its collapse. Imagine being one of the last families to leave. You've invested everything into this town, your money, your time, your future. You watch as your neighbors pack up and disappear, one by one. The streets that were once crowded become empty. The sounds of civilization fade into silence. And then you're gone too, leaving behind everything you couldn't carry. The desert wind begins to blow through empty windows. Sand accumulates in corners where children once played. And the town becomes a monument to failed dreams. The psychological weight of walking through Rhyolite is something photographs can't capture. You're standing in a place where thousands of people once believed they were building something permanent, something that would last generations. They had no idea that within their own lifetimes, their town would become a graveyard of abandoned hopes. Some researchers have suggested that places like Rhyolite hold a kind of emotional residue, an imprint of all the human energy that was poured into these spaces. Whether or not you believe in such concepts, there's no denying that standing in these ruins evokes powerful feelings of melancholy and loss. Now let's travel deeper into the Nevada desert to a place called Belmont. This town has a different kind of story, one that's darker and more mysterious than Rhyolite. Belmont was established in 1865 after silver was discovered in the surrounding mountains. It quickly became the county seat and at its height had a population of around 2,000 people. The town was known for its lawlessness. This was the Wild West in its rawest form. Gunfights in the streets were common. The courthouse, which still stands today, witnessed countless trials for murder, theft, and claim jumping. But Belmont's decline wasn't just about economics. According to local tales passed down through generations, something else happened here, something that drove people away in fear. The stories speak of a series of mysterious deaths in the 1880s. Miners would go down into the shafts and never return. Search parties would find no trace of them, no bodies, no signs of cave-ins. Just nothing. The disappearances became so frequent that miners refused to work. Some reports from that era describe strange sounds coming from deep within the earth, sounds that one newspaper account described as resembling voices speaking in an unknown language. The town's decline accelerated rapidly after these incidents. By the early 1900s, Belmont was nearly deserted. Today, the courthouse still stands as a weathered monument to frontier justice, and several other buildings remain in various states of decay. But what makes Belmont truly eerie are the accounts from modern-day visitors. Urban explorers and photographers who've spent time in Belmont have reported unsettling experiences. Some describe feeling an overwhelming sense of dread when approaching certain mine entrances. Others claim to have heard footsteps following them through empty buildings, only to turn around and find no one there. One particularly chilling account comes from a group of researchers who stayed overnight in Belmont to document the town. According to their report, around 3 in the morning, they heard what sounded like a crowd of people talking and moving through the main street. When they looked outside, the street was empty, but the sounds continued for nearly 20 minutes before fading away. They described it as hearing an echo of the past, as if the town was replaying a moment from its history. Again, I'm not claiming this happened, I'm simply relaying what these individuals reported experiencing. What strikes me about these accounts is the consistency. People who visit these ghost towns independently, without prior knowledge of the legends, often report similar experiences. Shadow figures. Unexplained sounds. Feelings of being watched. Sudden drops in temperature. Are these genuine paranormal phenomena, psychological reactions to being in isolated and historically significant locations, or simply the power of suggestion? That's for each person to decide for themselves. Let's move on to Berlin, Nevada, a ghost town with a unique twist. Berlin isn't just abandoned, it's been partially preserved as a state park. The town was founded in 1905 as a mining camp, and unlike many boom-and-bust towns, Berlin had a relatively orderly decline. The mine closed in 1911, and by 1912, most residents had moved on. What makes Berlin fascinating is that many of the buildings remain exactly as they were left. You can walk into the assay office and see equipment still sitting on workbenches. The machine shop contains tools that look like they were set down just yesterday. Personal belongings are scattered throughout the buildings, bottles, dishes, papers, even clothing. This level of preservation creates an incredibly eerie atmosphere. It's one thing to see ruins, it's another to see a place that looks like people might return at any moment. The caretaker's residence, the stage station, the mine superintendent's house, all are maintained in a state of arrested decay. Walking through Berlin feels like stepping into a time capsule, and according to some visitors, the past isn't quite ready to let go. Reports from Berlin include sightings of a man in mining attire walking between buildings, the sound of machinery operating when all equipment has been silent for over a century, and the smell of cooking food emanating from kitchens that haven't had fires in decades. Park rangers who work at Berlin have their own stories, though many are hesitant to share them publicly. One ranger reportedly resigned after claiming to have seen the same ghostly miner on 3 separate occasions, always in the early morning hours, always walking toward the mine entrance before fading from view. What's particularly interesting about Berlin is its connection to another type of ghost, the prehistoric kind. The park also contains one of the richest deposits of ichthyosaur fossils in North America. These ancient marine reptiles lived over 200 million years ago when Nevada was covered by a vast ocean. Some visitors have suggested that there's something about the land itself, something that preserves echoes of the past, whether those echoes are from 100 years ago or millions of years ago. It's a romantic notion, though one without scientific basis. Now I want to take you to one of the most remote and least visited ghost towns in Nevada, Metropolis. And yes, the irony of that name is not lost on anyone who sees what remains today. Metropolis was founded in 1910 with grand ambitions. It was going to be an agricultural paradise in the desert, sustained by an elaborate irrigation system. Developers sold plots to farmers with promises of abundant water and fertile soil. At its peak, Metropolis had a hotel, a school, a mercantile store, and about 75 residents. But the dream collapsed almost immediately. The irrigation system failed. The soil wasn't as fertile as promised. The weather was harsher than anyone anticipated. By 1912, just 2 years after its founding, people were already leaving. By 1915, Metropolis was completely abandoned. Today, only a few crumbling foundations and the ruins of a concrete schoolhouse remain. The remoteness of Metropolis means very few people ever visit, but those who make the journey report a profound sense of isolation and sadness. The legends surrounding Metropolis are different from other ghost towns. Rather than stories of ghostly apparitions, the tales focus on the overwhelming emotional atmosphere of the place. Visitors describe feeling an intense melancholy when walking through the ruins, as if the disappointment and broken dreams of the original settlers still permeate the air. Some have reported breaking down in tears without understanding why. Others describe a sensation of being pulled into the past, of momentarily experiencing the desperation and hopelessness that must have consumed the last residents as they realized their agricultural experiment had failed. There's also a darker legend associated with Metropolis. According to local tales, one family refused to leave even after everyone else had gone. They believed they could make the farm work, that they just needed more time. But the isolation, the heat, the failure of their crops, something broke the father's mind. The story goes that he took his family's lives before taking his own, unable to face returning to civilization as a failure. There's no historical documentation to verify this tale, and it may be nothing more than a campfire story, but it adds another layer of tragedy to an already sad place. What Metropolis represents is a different kind of ghost town, not one built on mining wealth and destroyed by economic collapse, but one built on false promises and destroyed by harsh reality. It's a reminder that the desert doesn't care about human ambition, about blueprints and business plans. The Nevada desert has killed more dreams than anyone could count, and Metropolis is a monument to those who bet everything on a promise that turned out to be empty. Let's shift gears and talk about Gold Point, a ghost town that's experiencing something unusual, a bizarre kind of resurrection. Gold Point was founded in the late 1860s and went through several boom and bust cycles. By the 1960s, it was completely abandoned. But in the late 1990s, a man named Herb Robbins purchased the entire town. He began restoring buildings and even encouraged people to move in. Today, Gold Point has a tiny population, usually fewer than 10 residents, and functions as both a living community and a tourist attraction. What makes Gold Point fascinating from a paranormal perspective is that current residents live side by side with the town's ghostly reputation. The Gold Point Saloon, which serves as the social center of the tiny community, is reportedly one of the most haunted buildings in Nevada. According to accounts from both residents and visitors, glasses move on their own, doors open and close without explanation, and the jukebox occasionally turns on by itself. One of the most frequently reported phenomena is the appearance of a man in old-fashioned mining clothes who sits at the bar, orders a whiskey, and then simply isn't there anymore. The current residents of Gold Point have an interesting relationship with these reported phenomena. Rather than being frightened, many seem to accept the ghostly activity as just another quirk of desert living. One resident was quoted in a local newspaper saying that the ghosts were there first, and the living folks are the newcomers. It's a fascinating perspective, the idea that humans are the temporary visitors in a place where the past has permanent residence. Gold Point also has an active cemetery on a hill overlooking the town. Unlike many ghost town cemeteries that have been vandalized or fallen into complete disrepair, Gold Point Cemetery is maintained by the current residents. Walking through it, you can read the names and dates on weathered headstones, each one representing someone who came to this desolate place seeking something, wealth, opportunity, a fresh start, and ended up buried in the desert they hoped to conquer. Some of the graves are marked simply as unknown, nameless individuals whose stories died with them. Visitors to the cemetery have reported their own strange experiences. Photographs taken in the graveyard sometimes show unexplained orbs of light or misty figures that weren't visible to the naked eye. Whether these are genuine paranormal phenomena, dust particles catching the light, or lens flare is a matter of interpretation. What's undeniable is the emotional impact of standing in that cemetery, looking out over the remains of Gold Point, and contemplating all the lives that passed through this place, all the hopes that flourished and died under the relentless desert sun. Now let's venture to one of the strangest and most controversial ghost towns in Nevada, a place called Manhattan. No, not that Manhattan, this one is a small mining town in Nye County that experienced multiple boom and bust cycles. Gold was discovered there in 1905, and the town quickly grew to a population of around 4,000. Unlike many mining towns that died completely, Manhattan has lingered in a state of semi-abandonment for over a century. A handful of people still live there, maintaining a ghostly existence among the ruins. What makes Manhattan particularly interesting are the stories surrounding its old cemetery and the mines themselves. According to local legends, there was a mine collapse in 1909 that trapped 12 miners underground. Rescue efforts were mounted, but after 3 days of digging, the decision was made to seal the mine rather than risk more lives trying to reach men who were certainly dead. The bodies of those 12 miners were never recovered. They remain entombed in the earth beneath Manhattan to this day. Ever since that tragedy, there have been reports of strange occurrences around the sealed mine entrance. People claim to hear knocking sounds coming from underground, not random sounds, but rhythmic knocking, as if someone is deliberately trying to communicate. Others report hearing muffled voices or screams echoing from the depths. Mining engineers who've examined the site insist the sealed shaft is structurally sound and that any sounds are likely just the mountain settling or water dripping through rock formations. But the legends persist. The Manhattan Cemetery adds another layer to the town's eerie reputation. It's located on a windswept hillside, and the elements have not been kind to it. Many graves have collapsed, headstones have toppled, and some burial plots have eroded away entirely. There are accounts of visitors seeing figures moving through the cemetery at dusk, figures that vanish when approached. One particularly persistent story involves a woman in a long black dress who appears to be mourning at a grave, but when anyone gets close enough to see which grave, she disappears. What I find compelling about Manhattan is that it represents the liminal space between ghost town and living community. It's not fully abandoned, but it's no longer truly alive. The few residents who remain are essentially caretakers of a dying place, witnesses to the final breath of a town that refuses to completely expire. There's something deeply melancholy about that, the slow fade rather than the dramatic collapse. In some ways, it's sadder than total abandonment. Let's talk about Aurora, a ghost town that literally straddles the border between Nevada and California. When Aurora was founded in 1860, no one was quite sure whether it was in Nevada or California. This confusion led to the town being claimed by both states, with residents paying taxes to both governments and voting in both states' elections. The boundary dispute wasn't resolved until 1863 when a proper survey determined Aurora was actually in Nevada. By that time, the town had already established itself as a major mining center. Aurora's history is particularly violent. The town was known for its vigilante justice and frequent lynchings. In one 18-month period, there were reportedly over a dozen hangings, some legal, many extra-legal. The stories speak of men strung up from the beams of the Armory Hall, their bodies left swaying as warnings to others. Whether justice was served or innocent men died is lost to history, but the violence left its mark on the town's reputation. By the 1880s, the mines played out and Aurora began to decline. Unlike many ghost towns where substantial ruins remain, Aurora has been almost completely erased. The buildings were dismantled for their materials, the bricks and lumber hauled away to be used in other towns. Today, virtually nothing remains except foundations, mining debris, and the cemetery. It's as if Aurora has been systematically deleted from the landscape, leaving only traces and memories. But according to those who visit the site, Aurora's violent past hasn't been erased quite as thoroughly as its physical structures. The most commonly reported phenomenon at Aurora is the sound of a crowd, angry voices, shouting, the kind of noise a mob would make. These sounds are typically heard near where the Armory Hall once stood, the site of many of those vigilante hangings. Visitors have also reported seeing a figure swaying from an invisible rope, suspended in midair where the gallows once stood, there for a moment and then gone. The Aurora Cemetery is one of the few tangible remnants of the town. Many graves have lost their markers, but some original headstones remain, weathered and leaning. The cemetery offers a sobering reminder of how harsh life was in these mining camps. Many graves are for children, lives cut short by disease, accidents, or the simple brutality of frontier existence. One grave marker is for a 5-year-old girl who drowned in a mining sluice. Another is for a teenager who was shot in a dispute over a card game. These weren't just rough men seeking fortune, these were families trying to build lives in an unforgiving environment. I want to take a moment to talk about why these ghost towns affect us so deeply. It's not just the abandoned buildings or the tragic histories. It's what they represent. These towns are monuments to the impermanence of human endeavor. We build and plan and invest our hopes into creating something lasting, and then time and circumstance reduce it all to rubble and dust. Walking through a ghost town forces us to confront our own mortality and the mortality of everything we create. In 100 years, what will remain of our towns, our homes, our lives? Will we be remembered, or will we be forgotten like the thousands who passed through these Nevada ghost towns? There's also something primal about these places. They trigger an instinctive response to abandonment and decay. As humans, we're drawn to inhabited spaces, to the signs of other people. When we encounter places that show clear evidence of human presence but lack actual humans, it creates a cognitive dissonance that feels unsettling. Some researchers suggest this is why so many people report feeling uncomfortable in ghost towns even during broad daylight. Our brains are wired to be suspicious of places that look like they should have people but don't. Let's move on to Delamar, known by a truly grim nickname, the Widowmaker. Delamar was founded in the 1890s after gold was discovered in the area. The town grew rapidly and at its peak had a population of around 3,000. But Delamar earned its sinister reputation from the conditions in its mines. The rock in Delamar had an exceptionally high silica content. When miners drilled or blasted, they created clouds of fine silica dust. Breathing this dust caused silicosis, a fatal lung disease. The miners called it miner's consumption. The death rate in Delamar was staggering. According to historical records, the average life expectancy for a miner working in Delamar was less than 2 years after starting work. Think about that. Men would arrive healthy and strong, and within 24 months, they'd be coughing blood and dying slow, agonizing deaths. The town's cemetery filled rapidly. Some estimates suggest over 400 men died from silicosis in Delamar's mines. These deaths created many widows, hence the town's grim nickname. Despite this horrific death toll, the mines continued to operate. The promise of gold was too strong, the economy too dependent on the mines to shut them down. Men kept coming, kept working, kept dying. It wasn't until 1909 that Delamar was finally abandoned, not because of the death toll but because the gold ran out. Today, very little remains of Delamar. Most of the town was dismantled and the materials salvaged. A few foundations, some mining debris, and the cemetery are all that's left. But visitors to the Delamar site report disturbing experiences. The most common is the sound of coughing, deep, wet, rattling coughs that seem to come from nowhere. Some describe hearing the sound of pickaxes striking rock, the rumble of ore carts, the sounds of the mines that killed so many. Others report seeing figures of men covered in dust, hunched over and struggling to breathe, visible for just a moment before fading away. The cemetery itself is said to be a place where people feel an overwhelming sense of grief and loss, as if the sorrow of all those widows has soaked into the ground itself. Delamar represents the darkest side of the Nevada gold rush, the human cost of greed and ambition. These weren't men dying in dramatic mine collapses or gunfights. They were dying slowly, drowning in their own fluids as their lungs hardened and failed. They knew the mines were killing them, but they kept working because they needed the money, or because they believed they'd strike it rich before the disease caught up with them, or simply because they had no other options. Delamar is a testament to how expendable human lives were considered in the pursuit of precious metals. Let's shift to Candelaria, another silver mining town with a fascinating history. Candelaria was established in the 1860s and experienced several boom periods. What makes Candelaria interesting is that it had one of the most diverse populations of any Nevada mining town. The population included Americans, Mexican immigrants, Chinese laborers, and indigenous peoples all working and living in close proximity. This diversity led to a unique cultural blend but also to significant tensions and occasional violence. The town's decline came in stages. The mines would fail, the population would dwindle, then new ore would be discovered and people would return. This cycle repeated several times until the final abandonment in the mid-20th century. Today, Candelaria is accessible only by rough dirt roads, and what remains are scattered ruins slowly being consumed by the desert. Stone walls still stand, marking where buildings once were. The cemetery contains graves with inscriptions in multiple languages, a testament to the town's diverse population. The legends surrounding Candelaria often focus on the tensions between different ethnic groups. There are stories of a Chinese miner who was lynched by a mob after being falsely accused of theft, his spirit supposedly cursing the town. Another tale speaks of a Mexican woman who died during childbirth and whose cries can allegedly still be heard on quiet nights. There are also accounts of indigenous spirits, predating the mining town entirely, whose sacred sites were disturbed by the mining operations. What makes Candelaria's legends particularly complex is this multicultural dimension. The ghost stories reflect the town's diversity, spirits from different cultures, different languages, different traditions all supposedly haunting the same space. Whether one believes in such things or not, it's a reminder that ghost towns weren't just populated by one type of person. These were complex communities with all the diversity, tension, beauty, and ugliness that entails. The spirits that allegedly remain are as varied as the living population once was. Now I want to talk about Goldfield, which is unique among Nevada ghost towns because it's not quite dead. Goldfield was once the largest city in Nevada, with a population that peaked at around 20,000 in the early 1900s. The town had electric lights, telephones, 5 newspapers, and numerous saloons and gambling halls. The Goldfield Hotel was one of the most luxurious establishments in the entire West, with a lobby modeled after European grand hotels. But like all mining towns, Goldfield's prosperity was tied to the or beneath its streets. By the 1920s, production was declining. A series of fires destroyed many buildings. The Great Depression dealt another blow. By the 1950s, Goldfield had shrunk to a tiny fraction of its former population. Today, about 200 people live in Goldfield, maintaining a strange existence in a town built for 20,000. The Goldfield Hotel is the centerpiece of the town's ghostly reputation. Closed since 1945, the hotel has become infamous in paranormal circles. According to legends, a woman named Elizabeth was a prostitute working in the hotel in the early 1900s. She became pregnant, allegedly by the hotel owner. The story claims he locked her in room 203, where she gave birth. He then murdered both Elizabeth and her baby, disposing of their bodies. Ever since, room 203 is supposedly the most haunted location in the entire hotel, with reports of a woman's voice, the cry of an infant, and apparitions of a woman in period clothing. It's important to note that there's no historical evidence for Elizabeth's story. No records of such a murder exist. The tale may be entirely fabricated, a ghost story created to explain the eerie atmosphere of the abandoned hotel. But the reports from people who've entered the hotel are consistent. Investigators claim their equipment malfunctions. Voices are heard in empty rooms. Doors open and close on their own. Photographs show unexplained anomalies. Even skeptics admit the hotel has an intensely unsettling atmosphere. Beyond the hotel, Goldfield itself has a haunted quality. The town is too small for its infrastructure. You can drive down streets lined with buildings designed for a bustling city, but they're mostly empty. The high school is a massive structure built for hundreds of students but now serves maybe 24. It's like walking through a city after some apocalyptic event has wiped out most of the population. The people who remain seem like survivors in a post-apocalyptic landscape, maintaining a semblance of civilization among overwhelming emptiness. What Goldfield represents is something different from total abandonment. It's a living ghost town, a place caught between life and death, unable to fully die but no longer truly alive. The residents are caretakers of a fading dream, keeping the lights on in a place most people have forgotten. There's something admirable but also deeply sad about that. It makes you wonder what drives people to stay in such places. Is it stubbornness? Hope? An inability to let go? Or is there something about these towns that gets into your blood, that makes leaving feel like abandonment? Let's discuss one more town that embodies the mystery and melancholy of Nevada's ghost towns, Unionville. Founded in 1861 after silver was discovered in the Humboldt Range, Unionville grew quickly. At its peak, it had about 1,000 residents and was the county seat. Among its famous temporary residents was Mark Twain, who spent time in Unionville in 1862 trying his hand at mining before returning to writing. He later described the experience in his book Roughing It, painting a vivid picture of life in a Nevada mining camp. Unionville's decline was gradual. The mines played out by the 1880s, but the town didn't die immediately. It lingered, shrinking slowly over decades. Today, Unionville has a handful of residents, maybe a dozen or so. The old buildings still stand, maintained by the few people who call this place home. There's something particularly poignant about Unionville because you can still see what the town was: the school, the church, the homes, all preserved in various states of repair. The legends of Unionville are less dramatic than some other ghost towns but perhaps more touching for their subtlety. Residents and visitors report seeing a figure walking along the creek that runs through town, carrying what appears to be a gold pan. The figure seems solid and real until you get close, and then it's simply gone. Another frequently reported phenomenon is the sound of children playing and laughing, echoing from the old schoolhouse even though no children live in Unionville anymore. Some interpret these as residual hauntings, echoes of the past replaying like recordings. What strikes me about Unionville is its quiet dignity. Unlike towns that collapsed dramatically or were erased from the landscape, Unionville has aged gracefully. The current residents maintain the historic buildings, preserve the town's character, and seem at peace with living in a place where the past is more substantial than the present. There's a sense that they're not fighting against the town's ghost town status but embracing it, accepting their role as the last chapter in Unionville's story. As we near the end of our journey through Nevada's ghost towns, I want to reflect on what these places teach us. They're not just tourist attractions or paranormal hotspots. They're reminders of the American dream in its rawest form, the belief that you could go into the wilderness, work hard, and build something from nothing. For every person who struck it rich in Nevada's mining camps, hundreds or thousands failed. For every town that thrived, dozens withered and died. These ghost towns are the monuments to those failures, and yet there's something beautiful about them. They represent hope, ambition, and the willingness to risk everything for a chance at a better life. The reported paranormal activity in these towns, whether you believe in it or not, reflects something important about human psychology. We don't like to think that lives can simply end and be forgotten. The ghost stories give those forgotten miners, prostitutes, shopkeepers, and families a kind of immortality. They're remembered not through history books but through legends. Their presence is felt, if not seen. In a strange way, the ghost stories are a form of respect, an acknowledgement that these people lived, suffered, hoped, and died in these harsh places. Nevada's ghost towns also force us to confront the environmental cost of human ambition. These towns scarred the landscape. They consumed resources, poisoned water sources with mining runoff, and left behind toxic waste that will persist for centuries. The desert is slowly reclaiming these towns, covering the scars with sand and time, but the damage remains beneath the surface. It's a reminder that our actions have consequences that outlast us, that the places we build and abandon don't simply cease to exist, they continue to affect the land and future generations. There are dozens more ghost towns scattered across Nevada that we haven't covered. Each has its own story, its own legends, its own ghosts. Places like Tuscarora, Hamilton, Treasure City, Palmetto, Midas, and countless others, each representing a moment in history when people believed they were building something permanent, only to watch it crumble and fade. Nevada is a graveyard of dreams, a landscape littered with the remnants of human ambition. And perhaps that's what makes it so compelling. These ghost towns are mirrors reflecting our own hopes and fears about impermanence, failure, and what remains after we're gone. For those who visit these towns, whether seeking paranormal experiences, historical insights, or simply solitude, there's an unspoken code. These places are fragile. Every artifact removed, every building vandalized, every grave disturbed erases a bit more of the story these towns have to tell. If you visit a ghost town, leave it as you found it. Take only photographs. The true value of these places isn't in the old bottles or mining equipment you might find, it's in the experience of standing in a place where history is tangible, where you can feel the weight of all those vanished lives. I also want to emphasize the importance of safety. These ghost towns are not theme parks. The buildings are structurally unsound. Old mine shafts can collapse. The desert environment is dangerous, especially in summer when temperatures can exceed 120 degrees. People have died exploring Nevada's ghost towns, falling through rotted floors, getting trapped in mines, succumbing to heat and dehydration. If you decide to visit these places, be prepared, be cautious, and respect both the dangers of the environment and the history you're walking through. Before we conclude, I want to share one final thought. In researching these ghost towns, I've been struck by how many different types of ghosts haunt them. There are the literal ghosts of legend, the apparitions, the mysterious sounds, the unexplained phenomena. But there are also the ghosts of economic systems that exploited workers and extracted wealth from the land. The ghosts of manifest destiny and the displacement of indigenous peoples. The ghosts of environmental destruction. The ghosts of dreams deferred and lives cut short. These towns are haunted by history in every sense of the word. What draws us to ghost towns isn't just curiosity about the paranormal, it's a deeper need to connect with the past, to understand the people who came before us, to see evidence that we're part of a larger human story. In our modern world of cities and suburbs and digital connections, these ghost towns offer something increasingly rare, a tangible connection to history, to the land, to the raw reality of what it took to survive in these harsh places. They remind us that civilization is more fragile than we like to think, that the towns and cities we consider permanent could, under the right circumstances, become ghost towns themselves. So whether you believe in ghosts or not, whether you think these reported phenomena are genuine supernatural occurrences or just the power of suggestion and imagination, Nevada's ghost towns offer something valuable. They're open-air museums of the American West, cautionary tales about ambition and greed, and reminders that everything we build will eventually fade. They teach humility, respect for those who came before, and appreciation for the impermanence of all human endeavors. If this video has sparked your interest in ghost towns, I encourage you to do your own research, plan safe visits if you're so inclined, and most importantly, share these stories. The best way to honor the people who lived and died in these forgotten places is to remember them, to tell their stories, to ensure that even though the towns have died, the memory of them persists. And if you enjoyed this journey through Nevada's ghost towns, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and turned on notifications. Leave a comment telling me which ghost town fascinated you most, or if you have your own ghost town stories to share. Until next time, remember, the desert keeps its secrets, but if you listen carefully, it might just whisper them to you.